All right, we are back with Seneca's Letters to Lucilius. Thanks, you guys, for joining me on this journey. It's just been a pleasure to have you guys along with me and seeing the growth of this channel. And it's just fun to see some actual growth, and I enjoy this a lot. So let's jump into the letter 14, which is on the reasons for withdrawing from the world. And he says here in verse 1, I confess that we all have an inborn affection for our body. I confess that we are entrusted with its guardianship. I do not maintain that the body is not to be indulged at all, but I maintain that we must not be slaves to it. He will have many masters who makes his body his master, who is over fearful in its behalf, who judges everything according to the body. So, real simple opening here. He's saying, yeah, the body's good, okay, and we all like our body. However, if you're too attached to it and you are too much focused on that, you're going to have a lot of masters. You're going to have a lot of troubles. You're going to have a lot of things to try and meet. So he says that you shouldn't be judging everything according to the body. So in verse 2, he says, we should conduct ourselves not as if we ought to live for the body, but as if we could not live without it. I think this is worth talking about. So he is saying, we shouldn't be living for the desires, the carnal desires of our flesh, right? Someone asked me to compare this to Christianity, to Stoic philosophy to Christianity. There it is. I mean, I think there's a very big comparison, whether the Christians borrowed from the Stoics or, whatever. I can't say for absolute sure, but there's a lot of similarities. Okay? And he's saying that, we shouldn't be living for the desires of the flesh, okay? But we should be living as if we could not live without it. So essentially taking care of it, okay? Because we need our body, all right? It is too great love, for it makes us restless with fears, burdens us with cares, and exposes us to insults. Let's just break this one sentence down, because there's so much in here. It is too great love for it. So too great of love for your body that makes us restless with fears. That's interesting. So we have all these fears because we care about our body so much, burdens us with cares, and exposes us to insults, right? If you value your body so much, if someone calls you ugly, it's insulting to you, right? You're afraid of getting fat. You're afraid of dying, of getting sick. You're afraid of all of these things, right? It's burdening you. So too much love for your body causes these things. He says, virtue is held too cheap by the man who counts his body too dear. So the man who thinks too much about his flesh, his body, his desires, virtue is not so important to that person. He's too vain, you could say, all right? We should cherish the body with the greatest care, but we should also be prepared when reason, self-respect, and duty demand the sacrifice to deliver it even to the flames. So here's where Seneca's viewpoint on it is. He's like, look, you should cherish your body, of course. You should be happy with that. But at the point where some greater cause, nobler cause exists, you should be willing to deliver it even to the flames, sacrifice the body if necessary, because the principles and the virtue is more important. Now, some people might disagree with this. From a pragmatic standpoint, if you are a materialist, if you believe that all there is the body, then it would probably not make sense to ever sacrifice the body. I mean, it's a fair point. If you're religious, now there's some reasons why you might sacrifice the body, and also, but there's also a pragmatic reason which he hasn't discussed here, but is the sense that you live your life by these principles, and you'd rather not live a life where you have sacrificed your principles than one where you have and you are miserable because of it. And so, there's some interesting things to think about here. I'll let you debate that amongst yourself. But the idea here is that he's saying that you should be prepared to not, and this might not be like a total sacrifice of your life. It could be in this case, and I think that is what he's referring to. But he's saying that there are instances where something is more valuable than your body. There are things that are more important. And perhaps the way to think about this is, would you die for a loved one? Okay. I think that is a noble thing to do. In verse 3, he says, let us, however, insofar as we can avoid discomforts as well as dangers, and withdraw to safe ground by thinking continually how we may repel all objects of fear. Okay? So let us, however, and as far as we can, avoid discomforts as well as dangers, and withdraw to safe ground by thinking continually how we may repel all objects of fear. So let's avoid discomforts. Let's get us in a good place by repelling objects of fear. All right. If I'm not mistaken, there are three main classes of these. We fear want, we fear sickness, and we fear the troubles which result from the violence of the stronger. So there's three fears that he's saying here. The want, okay, what we don't have. Okay, we fear sickness, that we would get sick. Okay, and we fear the troubles which result from the violence of the stronger, like people harming us physically. All right. In verse 4, and of all these, that which shakes us most is the dread which hangs over us from our neighbor's ascendancy, for it is accompanied by great outcry and uproar. But the natural evils which I have mentioned, want and sickness, steal upon us silently with no shock of terror to the eye or to the ear. Okay, so what he's saying here is he's saying, look, that which shakes us the most with dread, okay, that which hangs over us is our neighbor's ascendancy. So our neighbor, so other people rising above us, okay, it's accompanied by great outcry and uproar, okay? So that's the fear that shakes us the most. The natural evils, want and sickness, they're silent with no shock or terror for the eye or the ear. The other kind of evil comes, so to speak, in the form of a huge parade, surrounding it in a retinue of swords and fire and chains and a mob of beasts to let loose upon the disemboweled entrails of men. So this other kind of evil. So what he's saying here, again, the neighbor's ascendancy. Most likely what he's talking about here is, a neighboring country, right, or tribe, or whatever city state that they're going to come over, they're going to take over, okay, and it's going to come in the form of a huge parade, right, with swords and fire and chains and beasts and disemboweled entrails of men. This is times that he was living in, not very pleasant. Okay, so let's read on. In verse 5, he says, picture to yourself upon this head the prison, the cross, the rack, the hook, the stake which they drive straight through a man until it protrudes from his throat. Think of human limbs torn apart by chariots driven in opposite directions, of the terrible shirt smeared and interwoven with inflammable materials, and of all the other contrivances devised by cruelty in addition to those which I have mentioned. Okay. This is a sobering thought here. So there's a lot of stuff. I mean, have you ever been? I went to in where was it? St. Augustine, Florida. There was this medieval torture museum. Man, there's some pretty sick stuff in there, right? So he's saying, picture this, okay? And on your own head, the cross, the rack, the hook, the stake which they drive straight through a man until it protrudes from his throat. Man, there's some. I looked up the details on this. It's pretty crazy. I mean, it literally goes up through your butt, okay? And you sit on the stake, and slowly your weight works its way up till it goes through your throat, and you don't die. You stay alive for a very long time like that. Okay, this is what people did. Think of human limbs being torn apart by chariots driven in opposite directions. Man, the terrible shirt smeared and interwoven with inflammable materials. You can guess what's going to happen after that. Okay, all of these cruelties. All right, so let's see what he has to say about that. He says in verse 6, it's not surprising then if our greatest terror is of such a fate, for it comes in many shapes and paraphernalia, and its paraphernalia are terrifying. For just as a torturer accomplishes more in proportion to the number of instruments which he displays, indeed, the spectacle overcomes those who would have patiently withstood the suffering. Similarly, of all the agencies which coerce and master our minds, the most effective are those which can make a display. Those other troubles are, of course, not less serious. I mean, hunger, thirst, ulcers of the stomach, and fever that parches our very bowels. They are, however, secret. They have no bluster and no heralding. But these, like huge arrays of war, prevail by virtue of their display and their equipment. Okay, so a couple of things that he's saying here, and a couple of points I'd like to make. Okay, so he's saying it's not surprising that our greatest terror is of such a fate. It comes in many shapes and paraphernalia that are terrifying. Okay, but he's saying here that the torture accomplishes more in proportion to the number of instruments which he displays. So the way he shows you all the things that he's going to do to you, that spectacle overcomes those who would have patiently withstood the suffering. Okay. And he's saying similarly, of all the agencies which coerce and master our minds, the most effective are those which can make a display. So the things that make us the most fearful are the things that make a display of it. And again, it's not to say that all these tortures that he talked about are not bad and not to be feared, but it is a display of them. It's how, again, some of these things you could just do, right? But why have the cross? Why have the hook? Why rip men apart with horses? It's a display of it, right? That some people would have just, if they were killed and suffered, or even if they were tortured, they would have just withstood that and went their way. But they fear this to a huge degree because of the display of it. Okay. And one thing I'll say about this, which I think is interesting, just as a side note here, a political kind of side note, is that, see, the freedom that you enjoy today in most of the world, most people back then, you're like, well, why did they let people do this to them? Okay, because of the forms of control. The forms of control were so... Look, right now, if you fuck up, maybe you go to jail, or, maybe you could get shot or something like that, but do you see what kind of torture? Mexican drug cartels, you wonder why they're around. It's because they do these things, okay, and worse, all right? And so, as far as torturing people, right? And so you have to really understand, again, this is a bit of a side note, but that at those times, there wasn't political dissent, because the price of political dissent was this. This is what happened to people. This was the reality that people lived in. That's why people just allowed themselves to be ruled, and just allowed themselves to, they just followed orders, and they just listened. They didn't fight for their freedom or their democracy, because this was the price for it. Okay? Historically, this has been the price. So it's just something to think about, again, Okay, so moving on, what he says here, also, he says that, so he's basically saying that the display of these things, that's what makes it's such a fear. But the other troubles aren't any less serious. Hunger, thirst, ulcer of the stomach, fever that parches our very bowel, all these other things that you could die from, or that could befall you, they're just as bad, but they're secret. There's no big parade. There's not all this display of things. And so that's why we don't fear them as much. Okay. And we kind of ignore them. In verse 7, he says, "Let us therefore see to it that we abstain from giving offense. It is sometimes the people that we ought to fear, or sometimes a body of influential oligarchs in the Senate. If the method of governing the state is such that most of the business is done by that body, and sometimes individuals equipped with power by the people and against the people, it is burdensome to keep the friendship of all such persons. It is enough not to make enemies of them. So the wise man will never provoke the anger of those in power. Nay, he will even turn his course precisely as he would turn from a storm if he were steering a ship." Okay, so this is kind of a departure from what we said, but it's related. So he was talking about fear and how, the display of all these things is what makes you afraid. But now he's also saying, like, also, don't piss people off. Okay, let me tell you why you don't want to piss people off, especially people in power, because they can do all this shit to you. Not fun, not good. You don't want that. So he's saying that, and there's some wisdom here. He's saying, look, okay, just abstain from giving offense. Okay, it's sometimes the people that we ought to fear, or sometimes a body of influential people, right? That that sometimes you have these people that are equipped with this power for the people or against the people, and it's a burdensome to keep friendship with all these people, right? So don't try and schmooze your way into all this stuff. It just don't make enemies of them, okay? And he's saying that a wise man will never provoke anger of those in power. Okay, he will even turn his course precisely as he would turn from a storm if he were steering a ship. So if you're wise, okay, and this still applies to you today, please believe this, even though you're not going to get a stake put through you, people will still, you have to understand power dynamics. And he's saying, look, a wise man, when he is about to make someone powerful angry, he just turns away, just like a ship going into a storm. It's like, maybe we don't want to go into a storm. Why would we do it? It doesn't make sense. So a lot of people are like, this person offended me. Man, there's so much bad stuff that can happen to you if you piss off the wrong people. So just don't do it. Just don't offend people. There's no point in doing it, really. Okay. You never know when someone is what someone has in their car when you get in road rage and things like that. All right. Verse 8. When you traveled to Sicily, you crossed the straits. The reckless pilot scorned the blustering south wind, the wind which roughens the Sicilian sea and forces it into choppy currents. He sought not the shore on the left, but the strand hard by the place where Charybdis throws the seas into confusion. Your more careful pilot, however, questions those who know the locality as to the tides and the meaning of the clouds. He holds his course far from the region notorious for its swirling waters. Our wise man does the same. He shuns a strong man who may be injurious to him, making a point of not seeming to avoid him, because an important part of one's safety lies in not seeking safety openly. For what one avoids, one condemns. Wow. Okay. There's so much wisdom here. This is why I love this. Okay. So let's break it down. He's saying, okay, when you travel to Sicily, all right, you cross the straits, all right? The reckless pilot, he scorned the blistering south wind, which causes, all the choppy currents and stuff like that. He sought not the shore on the left, but the strand, hard place where the sea's the most choppy, okay? But a careful pilot, he questions the locals and finds out what are the tides, what's the meaning of these clouds. He goes away from the place where you're likely to have your ship wrecked. And he's saying the wise man, he does the same thing. Okay, what he does is he shuns the strong man who could be harmful to him, not making a point of trying to avoid him. Okay, because if you do that, if you try to avoid harm, and if you make a point to that, if you cower to those who are stronger to you, then it's like you're condemning them, right? So for example, let's say that you're walking down the street and you see someone who looks like a thug, like they look like like someone who would rob you or something like that. Again, you might be wrong about it, but you make that judgment, and then you get scared and you run away from them. Do you think they're going to get pissed off? Even if they are you're condemning them, right? You're making a show of it. They're going to potentially chase after you. Now you might have started some trouble, and you're just trying to avoid trouble, and you started trouble. So what he's saying, and what you should do instead, is just be a little bit diplomatic. Okay, be smart, be tactful. Don't piss off people in power. At the same time, don't kiss their asses and make it so that it's clear that you're just trying to get your safety. Instead, navigate this carefully. Think about the situation. Ask the locals. Figure out what is the best course of action. How can you do this in such a way that doesn't offend a person, that doesn't make it seem like you're avoiding them or that you're trying to just not piss them off. Instead, just act in a way that is prudent, that makes sense, right? Okay. But I think this is important because a lot of people will take this to the extreme, and they will purposely try to seek safety, and that will happen. Again, I've been in some fights, and I've been in situations where, someone wants to start stuff with you at a bar or something. There's some drinking involved, and obviously you shouldn't piss them off more, right? You shouldn't egg them on, okay? Especially if they're drunk, there's no point in doing that because you're going to get into a confrontation. But at the same time, if they're trying to get in confrontation with you, you shouldn't just be like, hey man, I don't want any trouble. Leave me alone. Okay, I get it. I'm sorry, apologize. They're going to start trouble as well, right? Instead, the way to handle that situation as a man is to diffuse the situation. It's not to back down, not to run away, not to egg them on, but to dissolve it, to say, hey, that's, let's get a beer, man. Let me buy you a beer. I didn't mean to offend you. You seem like a pretty cool guy. Let's have a beer and let's chat. It's like, no, I don't want to talk to you. All right, cool. That's fine, man. But yeah, no, hey, what you said, I get it. I totally get it. No, it's cool. No, I understand how you feel. It's totally cool. Yeah, whatever. You're not backing down, right? It depends on the situation, obviously, but I'm giving you an example of that. Okay, let's move on. All right, he says here in verse 9, we should therefore look about us and see how we may protect ourselves from the mob. And first of all, we should have no cravings like theirs, for rivalry results in strife. Again, let us possess nothing that can be snatched from us to the great profit of a plotting foe. Let there be as little booty as possible on your person. No one sets out to shed the blood of his fellow men for the sake of bloodshed. At any rate, very few. More murderers speculate on their profits than give vent to hatred. If you're empty-handed, the highwayman passes you by. Even along an infested road, the poor may travel in peace. Okay, so he's just giving some practical advice here, okay? And it applies today. It definitely applied back then. And he's like, look, how can you protect yourself from the mob? All right. So first of all, you shouldn't be like them. Don't be being all crazy, right? The rivalry results in strife. If you're, getting super excited, let's say at a sporting event and you're, with your team and against the other team, yeah, that's where conflicts happen. Bad things happen. The mob will turn against you. Okay. So he's saying don't have anything that can be taken from you that has of great profit, right? So okay, so what does this look like? He's saying, look, people who murder people, they usually are thinking about the profit. It's not because of hatred. It's not because of anger that they do it. It's because they're trying to make some money, right? And so don't be flashing your shit. Don't be going around showing people all the stuff that you have and making it so that someone's likely to rob you or to take it from you. Okay, because if even the poor person, they can travel in peace on even a dangerous highway because there's nothing to be taken from them. So who's going to mess with them? In verse 10, next, we must follow the old adage and avoid three things with special care: hatred, jealousy, and scorn. And wisdom alone can show you how this may be done. It is hard to observe a mean. We must be chary of letting the fear of jealousy lead us into becoming objects of scorn, lest when we choose not to stamp others down, we let them think that they can stamp us down. The power to inspire fear has caused many men to be in fear. Let us withdraw ourselves in every way, for it is as harmful to be scorned as to be admired. Wow. Okay, so we got to break this down. There's a lot of stuff here. Okay. So he's saying we got to follow the old adage and avoid three things with special care: hatred, jealousy, and scorn. What are these things? Hatred, we don't want people to hate us. We don't want people to be jealous of us, of what we have. And we don't want people to scorn us. Okay? So let's talk about each one of these things. Wisdom alone can show you how this may be done. Okay? So he's saying we must be chary of letting the fear of jealousy lead us into becoming objects of scorn. And if you're not sure what chary means, I'll look up the word for you. Chary means cautiously or suspiciously reluctant to do something. Okay? So he's saying we must be cautious of letting the fear of jealousy lead us into becoming objects of scorn. Okay? So if we're so afraid of people being jealous of us that they actually scorn us because we appear pathetic, that's not good either. Okay? Lest we choose not to stamp others down, we let them think they can stamp us down. So we don't want to be so weak or appear so weak that other people think that they can just stomp us down. Okay, so we do have to stand our ground. That's like what I was talking about, is not avoiding the bully. You can't avoid the bully. That's not a good plan. Angering the bully is not a good plan. Okay? Being a target for the bully is also not a good plan. Don't have the lunchbox that has the caviar in it. You're going to get bullied. Okay, don't avoid the bully, don't piss off the bully, and don't appear weak to the bully. That's what he's saying here in life. All right, and so the power to inspire fear has caused many men to be in fear. The power to inspire fear has caused many men to be in fear. So what does this mean? Think about all of the kings who were able to make people afraid of them. It's also made them afraid that someone was going to kill a cruel king who, someone would overthrow them. So they've forced themselves into situations. So he's saying, the way really out of this bind is to withdraw yourselves in every way. It's just as harmful to be scorned as it is to be admired. So for people to hate you or to admire you, it's just as harmful. Because if people hate you, then they're likely to do something to you. Okay. If someone admires you, then they're also likely to do something to you because they're likely to be jealous of you. So you kind of want to avoid those things. Just fly low under the radar. In verse 11, he says, one must therefore take refuge in philosophy. This pursuit not only in the eyes of good men, but also in the eyes of those who are even moderately bad, is a sort of protecting emblem. So, if you're a philosopher, not only in the eyes of good men is this something, but even someone who's moderately bad, this sort of protects you. For speech making at the bar or any other pursuit that claims the people's attention wins enemies for a man. But philosophy is peaceful and minds her own business. Men cannot scorn her. She is honored by every profession, even the vilest among them. Evil can never grow so strong, and nobility of character can never be so plotted against. The name of philosophy shall cease to be worshipped and sacred. Okay, so let's break that down. Speech making at the bar, or any other pursuit that claims people's attention. So, if you talk, if you're charismatic, if you claim people's attention, it's going to win enemies for you, right? Yeah, I mean, a lot of people will like you, but you're going to get some enemies. Right? Heck, I get plenty of enemies here on YouTube just for existing, okay? Philosophy is peaceful and minds her own business. Men cannot scorn her. She is honored by every profession, even the vilest among them. So if you're practicing philosophy, you're just minding, you're going to be minding your own business. It doesn't mean that you have to preach to other people, right? I mean, if people want to listen, sure. If you want to teach people, sure, that's great. But you're not going to push people to anger. Evil can never go so strong, and nobility of character can never be so plotted against, that the name of philosophy shall cease to be worshipful and sacred. So never will it be the case that evil is so strong and character so plotted against that philosophy shall cease to be Why? Because it's wisdom. Because it doesn't matter. Because even evil people, even bad people, recognize wisdom and can appreciate that to a degree, right? Philosophy itself, however, should be practiced with calmness and moderation. Right? In verse 12, he says, very well then, you retort, do you regard the philosophy of Marcus Cato as moderate? Cato's voice strove to check a civil war. Cato parted the swords of maddened chieftains. When some fell foul of Pompey and others fell foul of Caesar, Cato defied both parties at once. Okay, so this is historical. Cato, he ruffled a lot of feathers. Okay, so in verse 13, he says, nevertheless, one may well question whether in those days a wise man ought to have taken any part in public affairs, and ask, what do you mean, Marcus Cato? It is not now a question of freedom. Long since has freedom gone to rack and ruin. The question is whether it is Caesar or Pompey who controls the state. Why? Why, Cato, should you take sides in that dispute? It is no business of yours. A tyrant is being selected. What does it concern you who conquers? The better man may win, but the winner is bound to be the worse man. I have referred to Cato's final role, but even in previous years, the wise man was not permitted to intervene in such plundering of the state. For what could Cato do but raise his voice and utter unavailing words? At one time, he was hustled by the mob and spat upon, forcibly removed from the forum and marked for exile. At another, he was taken straight to prison from the Senate chamber. So this ruffled some feathers in the day, right? Because a lot of people were really, Cato, the hero of the state. And he's saying, look, here's you want the real truth? I'll tell you the real truth about Cato. Okay, yeah, sure, he's a great guy, but here's the deal. What do you mean about him? Okay, is it a question of freedom? freedom. Cato had freedom was already gone. Freedom was already gone. Okay, here's the deal. Caesar or Pompey was going to rule. All right. He was going to control the state. So why should Cato care on who it is? Either way, it's going to be a dictator. Okay, and sure, the better man may win, but the winner is bound to become the worst man. He's going to be the worst man. Okay, because neither one of these guys was about democracy. They were taking over. Okay, and so he's saying that in previous years the wise man wasn't permitted to intervene in such plundering of the state. So what could Cato do but raise his voice and utter unavailing words? So even though he spoke all this stuff, it didn't matter. So at one time he was hustled by the mob and spat upon, and then he was removed from the Senate and taken straight to prison. So look, yeah, Cato might have been a great guy and he might have been brave, and we can use that as an example. But man, it doesn't mean that he was doing the right thing, because it was kind of a waste. That's what he's saying here. In verse 14, he says, however, we shall consider later whether the wise man ought to give his attention to politics. Meanwhile, I beg you to consider those Stoics who, shut out from public life, have withdrawn into privacy for the purpose of improving men's existence and framing laws for the human race without incurring the displeasure of those in power. The wise man will not upset the customs of the people, nor will he invite the attention of the populace by any novel ways of living. So, what is he saying here? He's saying, look, yeah, you can go into politics and try and change the world. Good luck. You're going to piss off a lot of people, and you're probably going to end up dead, all right, to be honest. However, the wise man, the Stoic, the philosopher, he doesn't need to be a public servant. He doesn't have to have a political career. Okay, he can shut himself out from public life. He can create laws for the human race without incurring the displeasure of those in power. What does this mean? He means that he can discover the real things, the real wisdom of reality, and he can write those things down and teach the people that are willing to listen, and they can read his writings, and people can learn laws to live by themselves instead of being imposed by a political party and having to try and make everyone conform to those things. Okay? The wise man's not going to upset the customs of the people. He's not going to invite attention to the populace by any novel ways of living. So he's just going to do his thing. And people will learn, and he'll benefit society from that. He doesn't have to have control over it in order to do this, right? Which is what's happening here, right? You're listening to these letters, you're watching these videos. Do I have to, run for the president of the United States and force you to obey these principles? No, you're doing it voluntarily, right? Seneca did his thing, and people benefited from that. Verse 15. What then? Can one who follows out this plan be safe in any case? I cannot guarantee you this any more than I can guarantee good health in the case of a man who observes moderation, although as a matter of fact, good health results from such moderation. Sometimes a vessel perishes in a harbor, but what do you think happens on the open sea? And how much more beset with danger that man would be who even in his leisure is not secure, if he were busily working at many things. Innocent persons sometimes perish, who would deny that, but the guilty perish more frequently. A soldier's skill is not at fault if he receives a death blow through his armor. Okay, so this is just simply to say this. Look, if you ask the question of if you do this, will you be safe? Guarantee? Do you guarantee me if I don't piss off people and whatever that I'm going to be safe if I'm listening to what you're saying? And he's like, no, of course I don't guarantee it. But think about it. A ship in the harbor sometimes comes to ruin. It can be destroyed, but it's more likely on the open sea. Okay, how much more dangerous is it? He says, the guilty perish frequently. Sometimes innocent people perish, but the guilty perish much more frequently. Okay. And he's saying that it's not a soldier's fault if his death blow is through the armor. Okay. The armor failed him. That's not his fault, but it still happens. So I can't guarantee you anything in life, but it's going to be less likely that you're going to hit a bad end if you listen to what I'm saying. And finally, in verse 16, and finally, the wise man regards the reason for all his actions, but not the results. The beginning is in our power. Fortune decides the issue, but I do not allow her to pass sentence upon myself. You say, quote, but she can inflict a measure of suffering and of trouble. The highwayman does not pass sentence when he slays. Okay, so this one is a little harder to dissect. And finally, the wise man regards the reason for all his actions. So the wise man thinks about why he's doing what he's doing, not the results. So the wise man is saying, I'm going to make right actions based on the reason, not on the results. This is a very important concept, okay? Do not think that the results is how you judge things. I played poker for a long time, and you can do the exact right thing in poker and lose, and you can do the exact wrong thing and win. It's not the results you should be judging. It should be the actions. You decide if you're doing the right action. That's what a wise man does. Okay? The beginning is in our power. Fortune decides the issue. Okay? So you make the choice. You put the events into motion. But ultimately, some things you're going to do the right thing and the wrong thing is going to happen to you. So that's part of fortune. But you start off by doing the right thing. But I do not allow her to pass sentence upon myself. Okay? So I'm not allowing it to be that I have done wrong, okay? You may say she can inflict a measure of suffering and trouble. That's true. The highwayman does not pass sentence when he slays, okay? When someone robs you on the highway and kills you, it doesn't mean you're wrong. He doesn't get to pass sentence. He's just slaying, okay? Verse 17. Now you are stretching forth your hand for the daily gift. Golden indeed will be the gift with which I shall load you. And inasmuch as we have mentioned gold, let me tell you how its use and enjoyment may bring you greater pleasure. Quote, he who needs riches least enjoys riches most. Author's name, please, you say? Now, to show you how generous I am, it is my intent to praise the dicta of other schools. The phrase belongs to Epicurus or Metrodorus or some one of that particular thinking shop. Okay, so he's quoting from someone else. Okay, and he's saying here that the quote is, he who needs riches least enjoys riches most, which is true if you think about this. if you don't need stuff and you get it, you're going to enjoy it more, right? And then in verse 18, he says, but what difference does it make who spoke the words? They were uttered for the world. He who craves riches feels fear on their account. No man, however, enjoys a blessing that brings anxiety. He is always trying to add a little more. While he puzzles over increasing his wealth, he forgets how to use it. He collects his accounts. He wears out the pavement in the forum. He turns over his ledger. In short, he ceases to be a master and becomes a steward. Farewell. So he leaves you with this thought, which is that if you're constantly worrying about money and you're worrying about making money and you're worrying about what you have and you spend so much time accounting for it and trying to make sure you get what's yours, you're no longer a master of it. Instead, you're a steward. You're the person taking care of it. It's the master. You're the steward. You become the person that's the caretaker of your finances instead of actually benefiting from them and using them. I'll see you tomorrow.